Some heartbreaks don't scream, they sit quietly beside hospital beds, in late-night pharmacy lines, between the cracks of cold dinners reheated 3 times. My name is Rachel Moore, and I gave up 12 years of my life for a man who raised me, then forgot I existed legally anyway, because at the reading of my father's will, after 4,380 days of care, sacrifice, and devotion, my name wasn't even mentioned. It started when I was 20. I was 2 weeks into college orientation, juggling classes and cafeteria maps, when I got the call. Your dad had a stroke, the kind that takes movement and memory, but leaves enough behind to recognize pain. Mom had passed 3 years earlier from breast cancer. My brother Ethan had moved across the country to work at a startup in Seattle. There was no one left. No one but me. I dropped out before the semester even started. Just for a few months, I told my advisor. Just until Dad gets better. 12 years later, I was still spoon-feeding him oatmeal and organizing his meds in color-coded boxes. First, everyone praised me. Neighbors brought casseroles. Church friends said, "You're an angel, Ethan." He texted occasionally, "You're doing God's work, Ratch. Let me know if you need anything." He never meant it. I'd ask for help. Once in a while, "Can you come home for a weekend? I haven't slept in days." The replies were always polite but hollow. "Wish I could. Things are crazy here. Flights are so expensive right now. I'll call Dad this week, promise." Dad would wait by the phone all Sunday. Ethan rarely called, and somehow, despite that, Dad's eyes would still light up whenever his name was mentioned. Our house became a maze of medical equipment. Lift chair, oxygen tanks, bed rails. The sound of the TV always a little too loud because Dad's hearing aid only worked on the left side. I learned to give sponge baths. Measure blood pressure. Recognize the early signs of another small stroke. Some nights, he'd cry out in confusion, calling for Mom. I'd hold his hand and whisper, "I'm here. You're not alone." He'd call me Lizzie, sometimes my mother's name. I stopped correcting him after year 4, every birthday. I baked a cake for him every Christmas. I decorated the mantel even if he was too tired to notice. Every Father's Day, I bought a card that said things like, "You gave me everything and I'm better for it." I meant every word, even when he forgot to say thank you. Even when he mistook me for the nurse. Even when I found texts on his phone where he told Ethan, "Wish you were here. House feels empty without you." I told myself, this is what love looks like. Quiet, loyal, selfless. I believed it. Until I read his will. The day of the will reading felt more like a formality than anything else. Dad had passed 3 weeks earlier. Quietly, in his sleep, I had been there, of course sitting beside him with a damp cloth in my hand. The hospice nurse asleep in the armchair across the room. He exhaled one last time and didn't inhale again. That was it. No drama. Just stillness. I didn't cry, not then. There wasn't time. I had paperwork to fill, guests to notify, funeral flowers to arrange. Ethan flew in the day before the service. He cried at the church, loud, public, the kind of grief people compliment. So emotional. He must have been so close to his dad. He wasn't. But I didn't correct anyone. That's not who I was. The lawyer's office smelled like dust and forgotten secrets. Ethan showed up late, sipping iced coffee like this was a casual check-in. I wore black slacks, a blouse I hadn't ironed properly, and a headache I couldn't shake. Mr. Klein, my father's estate attorney, was a small man with a cautious smile. "This won't take long," he assured us. I believed him, until the first sentence of the will made my lungs tighten. I, Charles Moore, being of sound mind, leave my residence and all properties within it to my son, Ethan Moore. I blinked. Wait. Double quotes. As a gesture of my faith in his leadership and ability to continue our family's legacy. I looked at Ethan. He shifted in his seat, awkward. Not smug, just surprised. Like he hadn't expected it either. My name hadn't been said yet. Maybe there was something else. Another clause, but sentence after sentence passed. His savings to Ethan. His vintage watch to Ethan. the photo albums to Ethan. Only once did he say my name. To my daughter Rachel. I leave my heartfelt thanks for her companionship and years of loyalty. She was a blessing in my final days. That was it. Not even his car, just a thank you. I didn't cry there either. I just nodded once, stood up, and walked out of the office like I was late for something important outside. The sun was too bright, the world too loud, and the ache inside me finally cracked open. 12 years. 12 years of cancelled plans, broken dreams, and pouring everything I had into a man who didn't think I was worth a signature. Ethan caught up with me in the parking lot. Rach, wait! I didn't know. I swear. I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't answer, because his shock wasn't enough. Because surprise is not the same as protest. He could have spoken up, could have said, "This isn't fair." Could have told the lawyer to split the estate, but he didn't. He stood there, silent, holding a manila folder full of a life he didn't help carry. He always talked about legacy, Ethan mumbled. Maybe he thought giving me the house was symbolic. Symbolic of what? I snapped. Of his ability to forget the person who held a bedpan at 2 a.m. He looked down. You were everything to him, Rach. Maybe he just didn't know how to show it. Then maybe he shouldn't have written it down. I walked away. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had spoon-fed Dad soup and read him the newspaper when his vision blurred. I stared at the house, the wallpaper I had cleaned, the plants I had watered, the handrails I had installed, the bed sheets I had changed twice a week for a decade. All of it. Now legally belonging to someone who hadn't seen Dad more than 6 times in 12 years. The rage didn't come all at once. It arrived in waves. First shame that I had expected anything, then grief for the girl I used to be before caretaking took over, then fury cold, clear, and wordless. I opened a drawer in the hallway and pulled out the journal I used to scribble in when Dad napped. I flipped to the last page and wrote, I gave him my 20s. He gave me a line in a will. I don't know what hurts more, being unchosen or realizing I always was. I closed the book and turned off the lights, because tomorrow I'd have to start deciding who I was outside of someone else's shadow. In the days that followed, I wandered through the house like a guest. Technically, that's what I was now. A guest in the place I had kept alive, the floors I had mopped, the rooms I had rearranged so a wheelchair could fit, the medicine drawer I had organized every Sunday gone now, emptied by the hospice nurse, and still, in the hallway, Dad's framed diploma hung perfectly centered. Below it, a crooked family photo from 1995, Ethan smiling wide, me holding a balloon, and Mom with her hand resting gently on Dad's shoulder like she knew she'd leave too soon. I stared at that photo longer than I should have. Not because of nostalgia, because I couldn't remember a single time Dad had touched me with that kind of softness. I called a locksmith on Thursday. Not to change the locks, I didn't have that right anymore, but to install a coded deadbolt at the back door when the locksmith asked if I was the homeowner. I hesitated. It's complicated, I said, but I'm still the one who protects this place. He nodded. Didn't ask more. Bless him. Ethan called twice. I didn't pick up. On the third attempt, he texted, Can we talk? I don't want this to stay like it is. I stared at it. What was this exactly? Me betrayed? Him benefiting from betrayal? Us pretending a decade of distance didn't matter? I didn't respond, because talking was a luxury I had earned 1,000 times over and been denied. Now I needed silence. My own, on my terms. I spent that evening going through my journals. There were dozens all half-filled. I'd write, in bursts, when Dad slept, or when I needed to scream but could end single quotes. In one, I found an entry dated March 8th, 2017. He forgot my birthday today. I reminded him. He smiled and said, Tell Amanda I said hi. I nodded and didn't cry until the laundry machine started spinning. I think it's safer to just be invisible. I ran my fingers over the ink. That was year 4. I was 24. My friends were getting engaged, getting promotions, moving cities. I was clipping Dad's toenails. I made a list in my notebook that night. Not for pity, for clarity. Things I missed while caring for my father. 4 job offers, 3 serious relationships, me graduation, me 20s missile fight. Closed the journal, lit a candle, whispered the words I'd never said out loud. You owed me more than this. It didn't bring peace, but it brought honesty. And that was a start. On Saturday, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. Inside, a single sheet. Rachel, I didn't know Dad had changed the will. He told me years ago that you'd get the house. I assumed it was still true. I don't know how to make this right, but if you want it, I'll sign it over. No conditions. It was always yours anyway. Ethan, I sat down slowly. Not because I believed him fully, but because, for the first time, I didn't expect anything. And yet, something came. I folded the letter, set it aside, didn't respond. Not yet. Because I still wasn't sure what I wanted. Justice, closure, the house, or maybe just to feel like I hadn't spent 12 years being erased. That night, I walked room to room with a notebook in hand, not listing damages, not tallying value, just remembering. The dent in the hallway from Dad's walker, the stain on the rug from spilled soup in 2014, the corner of the living room where he used to say, I can still hear your mother laugh right here. This wasn't just real estate, this was a mausoleum of my service. And I wasn't sure if I could live inside that grief much longer. Grief is a strange thing. It doesn't always come as sobs or silence. Sometimes it shows up as a strange ache in the grocery store because you see your father's favorite soup on sale. Sometimes it feels like guilt when you sleep in Pasta M for the first time in a decade and realize no one needs you. That was the hardest part. And no one needed me anymore. Not because I was unlovable, because the one person who had needed me completely, daily, desperately was gone. And now, the space where identity and responsibility had been tangled was blank. I cleaned the house differently that week. Not with obligation, with curiosity. I pulled back dusty curtains in the guest room, aired out closets no one had opened since Mom passed. I found an old box of my college things labeled Rachel, don't toss. Inside were dreams I forgot I had. A novel outline. A folder titled Grad School Psychology. A Polaroid of me at 19, grinning in front of a student center in a hoodie that said NYU bound. I sat on the floor and held that photo like a fossil, not because I mourned the version of me that never got to be, but because I realized she's not gone. She's just waiting. I visited the local community college website that night, clicked on Array entry for adult students tab, read about evening classes, part-time programs, sliding tuition scales. For the first time in years, the idea of learning again for myself, not for survival, made my hands tingle. I bookmarked the site. Didn't apply yet. Just let the door open a crack. The next morning, Ethan called again. I answered. Hey, I said. He exhaled, relieved. Thank God. We talked awkwardly at first, then honestly. He told me he'd spoken to the estate lawyer. I'm transferring the house to you. I mean it. I'll sign whatever. I didn't earn it, Rachel. You did. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell, why didn't you fight for me sooner? Another part whispered, maybe this is enough. I asked the one question I hadn't until now. Why do you think he did it? Ethan was quiet for a long time. I think he saw me as the extension of himself, the success story. You reminded him of everything he depended on and he hated feeling weak. I nodded. I'd always suspected it. Dad didn't reward devotion. He respected distance, and maybe that was the most painful truth of all. After the call, I sat in the living room and stared at the ceiling, the spot where water had once leaked. The same ceiling I used to look at while Dad snored in the recliner next to me. This wasn't a home anymore. This was a museum of memory, of martyrdom. of everything I put on pause so he could keep breathing. And now it was mine. Legally, officially, emotionally. But did I want it? Did I want to live in a space built on sacrifice? Or was I allowed to choose something new? The next day, I called a realtor. I'm not sure if I want to sell, I said, but I want to know my options. She came by, complimented the bones, the light, the care. It's clear someone loved this place. I didn't correct her, because I did love it, but I loved myself more now. And that was new. I spent the next week sorting room by room, boxing what mattered, donating what didn't, keeping only what belonged to me. Not the version of me that had lived to keep someone else alive. In the back of Dad's closet, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me. Inside, a letter. Rachel, I know I wasn't good at saying things or showing them, but I saw you every day, every hour you gave. I just didn't know how to be grateful without feeling ashamed. I'm sorry. You deserved more. Love, Dad. I read it 3 times, then folded it, placed it in the box labeled keep, and cried not out of anger, out of release. Selling the house didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like the first honest decision I'd made in years that wasn't based on duty, guilt, or a desperate need to be seen. The realtor sent me comps. The offers came in fast, apparently. The market was hot and our neighborhood was up and coming, words that meant nothing to me while I was measuring medication dosages and watching blood pressure monitors beep in the middle of the night. But now they meant freedom. I sat in the living room one last time, no couch, no rug, just a single folding chair and a blanket I had almost thrown out, then decided to keep. I ran my hand along the wall beside me. 12 years. 12 Christmases. 12 times I told myself, maybe next year, I'll start my life. 12 years of birthdays where the only candle I lit was on my father's cake. I used to think this house was my gift, my inheritance of love, even if it came without a title. Now I saw it for what it was. A place I survived, not a home I had to stay in. I sent Ethan a copy of the final paperwork signed. He called immediately. You really sold it? Yes. And you're keeping the money, right? Yes. He paused. Good. I hope you use every penny to start over. I will, I said. And not just with money. He didn't push. Didn't offer to split anything. Didn't make it about fairness. He just said, you deserve to be free. And for once, I believed him. With the sale finalized, I rented a 1-bedroom apartment downtown. Nothing fancy. Exposed brick, a narrow kitchen, creaky floorboards that somehow felt more like me than all the silence of the old house. I bought a bed frame with my own money. Hung fairy lights in the living room, painted one wall dark green and called it my corner of calm. No handrails. And no medical charts taped to the fridge, just me, and a second-hand bookshelf, and a calendar I could finally fill with things I wanted to do. 2 weeks later, I enrolled in evening classes, Introduction to Counseling. When the professor asked why we chose the course, I hesitated, then I said, because I spent over a decade holding space for someone who never held it back, and I want to learn how to do that better for others, and for myself. The room was quiet, and then she smiled. Welcome home. I saw Margaret, Dad's sister, at the grocery store a few weeks after that. She hugged me with the force of 10 missed holidays. You were everything to him. You know. I smiled. Soft. I know. He just didn't write it down. She sighed. Men of his generation. But I interrupted gently. No, let's not make it about the generation. Let's call it what it was. Neglect with nice furniture. She blinked, then laughed. We stood there in the freezer aisle. And for the first time in my life, I didn't make anyone else comfortable. And it felt good. I started writing again. Not just journal entries. Stories. Articles. A piece titled, Invisible Daughters. What happens when devotion is left out of the will? I submitted it to 3 websites. 2 rejected it. 1 published it. The emails started pouring in. I was my mom's caretaker for 9 years. She left the house to my brother. Your words made me cry. Thank you. This is the story of my life. And, slowly, I realized I wasn't alone. I never was. I had just been quiet. Now, I was writing myself louder. One afternoon, sitting in a coffee shop near campus, I ran into a girl from my past, Claire. We had shared a dorm for 2 weeks before I left college to care for Dad. She stared at me. Rachel. Wait, Rachel Moore? I smiled. Guilty. She blinked. You look lighter. I nodded. I finally stopped carrying things I was never meant to hold. We exchanged numbers. She said she worked in publishing now. Before we parted, she asked a question that caught me off guard. Do you still write? I thought about the journals, the essays, the list of things I missed while caring for my father, then said, I'm just getting started. They never say what happens after freedom. How it isn't a fireworks moment, or a montage of reinvention with upbeat music. It's quieter, heavier, like finally removing a cast and realizing you no longer remember how to walk without limping. That was me in those first few months after the house sold. I was free, but also uncertain. Who was I if I wasn't needed? If no one was sick, if no one depended on me to survive the night, if no one looked at me like I was their last line of defense against death. One night, I had a dream. I was standing in the old kitchen, wearing an apron, stirring soup. Dad sat in the living room. He looked younger, stronger, whole. He called out, Rachel, could you? And I woke up before he finished. The silence after. That line haunted me all day, because it reminded me of something I'd buried for years. I had equated being loved with being useful. If I wasn't doing something for someone, did I still deserve to be loved? In therapy, yes. I finally found when I voiced it aloud for the first time. I'm afraid, I told her. Of what? She asked gently. That if I stop sacrificing, I'll disappear. She leaned in. Where did you learn that? I didn't have to think. My parents, my brother, caregiving culture, maybe even God. She smiled kindly. Then it's time to unlearn it. So I started small. I made a rule. One kind thing for myself every day. Some days, it was a solo walk with my phone on airplane mode. Other days, it was saying no to things that drained me, invitations, guilt-laced favors, even calls I didn't know anyone anymore. I stopped answering texts from people who only reached out when they needed something. I started putting my phone on silent during meals. I redefined productive to include resting, reading, laughing, and slowly, the world didn't end. No one knocked on my door saying, how dare you stop giving everything away? Instead, life kept unfolding. And for once, it did so on my terms. I began attending an open mic at a bookstore downtown. Not to speak, just to listen. But one night, the host read a poem about daughters who were raised to heal people. People who never thanked them. My fingers trembled. To the break. I signed up. 10 minutes later, I was on stage, reading an excerpt from my essay. When I finished, no one clapped right away. Then someone stood. Then another. A room full of strangers rose to their feet. And I realized maybe I didn't need to be someone's emergency anymore. Maybe I could be someone's voice. Ethan called again, just to talk this time. He said he'd read my essay. Said he cried. I had no idea you were in that deep. You didn't ask, I replied. And I didn't know how to explain it without sounding bitter. You didn't sound bitter. You sounded honest. He was quiet for a moment, then added, you know, I always thought you were stronger than me. That's why I never offered more. I figured you didn't need it. I shook my head, not out of anger, out of realization. I needed it. I just got used to pretending I didn't. We agreed to meet for coffee next week. Not as siblings trying to rewrite history, but as adults finally starting to tell the truth. One night, curled on the couch with a blanket and no expectations, I reread the letter Dad had left me. I didn't know how to be grateful without feeling ashamed. I whispered back, I didn't know how to ask without feeling guilty. Maybe that's where we failed each other. Maybe that's what we both inherited. A kind of love that was afraid of itself. But I wasn't afraid anymore. That weekend, I stood in front of my class and gave a presentation titled Caretaking vs. Codependence. Where is the line? I used my own story not as a sob tale, but as a case study in survival, silence, and recovery. One student raised their hand at the end. Do you think you'll ever stop feeling like you were left out? I thought about it, then answered, no, but I think I've learned how to stop building my life around that absence, and that, I realized, was the truth. I hadn't filled the hole, I had just built around it with softness, with strength, with the kind of love that no longer required permission to exist. It was a regular Wednesday when the letter arrived. Not an email, not a text, a real cream-colored envelope with my name handwritten on the front in cursive that was vaguely familiar, old-fashioned, careful. Inside, a card embossed with lilacs, and a note from Aunt Joan, my mother's older sister, Rachel. Darling, we're hosting a family gathering next month for what would have been your father's 70th birthday. A small remembrance. Nothing fancy. It would mean a lot if you came. Love. Joan. No mention of what happened. No acknowledgement of the inheritance. No nod to the silence that followed the funeral. Just a polite invite, as though the last 15 years hadn't been a slow, simmering fracture. I placed the card on my kitchen table and stared at it for hours. It wasn't anger I felt. It was detachment. Not cold, not cruel. Just the kind of distance you earn after years of walking barefoot on glass and finally putting on shoes. I didn't rush to RSVP. I didn't rant to anyone. I just sat with it. What would going back mean? What would staying away prove? In therapy that week, I read the card aloud. It's like they want me to pick up the old script, I said, and pretend none of the story changed. My therapist nodded. Do you want to go? I shrugged. I don't know. Part of me wants to show up just to prove I've changed, that I'm not the helpful ghost daughter anymore, and the other part is tired of performing. She leaned forward. Maybe the question isn't whether or not you go. Maybe it's, what does your peace look like in that room? That stayed with me. A week later, I emailed Joan. Thank you for the invitation. I may come by, but I want to be clear, I'm not coming as a symbol. I'm coming as a person. I won't carry the emotional load this time. I won't deflect awkwardness. And I won't explain my grief to anyone who never asked about it. She didn't respond for days. Then finally, understood. You're welcome as you are. It wasn't warm, but it was enough. The gathering was held in the church basement where Dad had once taught Sunday school. Everything looked the same. Same beige walls, same stack of folding chairs, same stale scent of instant coffee and old hymnals. I arrived 15 minutes late on purpose. Heads turned as I walked in. I wore navy slacks, a wide blouse, and a quiet confidence no one could mistake for submission. A few relatives nodded. Some smiled. Most looked unsure of what to say. Good. Let them sit with it. Joan greeted me near the coffee table. I's gentle, I'm glad you came. Thanks, I said. I wasn't sure I would. I wasn't sure you should, she whispered. But, I'm still glad. We stood in silence for a moment, watching as someone passed around a framed photo of Dad from the ADS. Someone gave a toast, vague, rehearsed, forgettable, to Charles. Strong, proud, dedicated to family. I almost laughed. Not because it wasn't true, but because it wasn't the whole truth. After the speeches, I walked to the back of the room and stood by the bulletin board where old church announcements still hung from years ago. And that's when Ethan appeared beside me. Hey. He looked better than the last time I saw him. Less haunted, more present. You came, he said. So did you. Guess we both still believe in endings, or in rewriting them. We shared a soft, familiar silence. He cleared his throat. I started therapy. That caught me off guard. Yeah. Turns out, guilt and grief don't cancel each other out. I nodded. No, they sit beside each other and pretend to be friends. We smiled, sad and real. He pulled something from his pocket, a small box. "This was Dad's," he said. "He wanted me to have it, but I think he meant to give it to you. He just didn't know how." Inside was the vintage fountain pen Dad had used every night to do crossword puzzles. He'd loved that pen. So had I took it slowly. "Thank you." Ethan exhaled, relieved. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I didn't say it's okay, because it wasn't. But I said, thanks, I'm doing okay now." And that was true. As I left the church, I paused by the guest book. I flipped to the last page and, without signing my name, wrote a single line. "Some of us showed up every day. Even if history forgets it, we won't." Then I walked out into the cold evening, the sky wide and violet above me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't walking away in pain. I was walking forward on my own. When I walked out of that church basement, I left something behind. Not just the grief, not just the inherited silence. I left behind the version of me that kept waiting to be invited to the table, because I finally understood I could build my own. And I did. It started small. A community bulletin at my local coffee shop mentioned a volunteer opportunity, weekly support group for unpaid caregivers, seeking facilitators. I read it twice, then tore off a tab and called. The coordinator's name was Linda. Warm voice. Former nurse. She asked me why I was interested. I paused, then said, "Because no one told me I was allowed to talk while I was giving everything away." She said, "Welcome home." The first meeting had 6 people. A retired son taking care of his mother with dementia. A daughter commuting 4 hours a week to care for a father who still criticized her. A young man who hadn't slept in months. We sat in a circle. No one performed. No one fixed anything. We just told the truth, the kind that never fits into eulogies or polite holiday conversations. He thanked me, but he didn't remember my birthday. I love her. I just don't know who I am when she's asleep. Sometimes I dream of leaving and feel more guilt than grief. We didn't nod out of politeness. We nodded because we understood. And in that room I saw parts of myself I thought had disappeared. But they were still there, still healing, just finally being seen. I started hosting the meetings every Tuesday night. I brought tea, tissues, printouts about boundaries and burnout. Sometimes no one cried. Sometimes everyone did. One night, a woman named Frances leaned over and whispered, "You make us feel like we're not invisible." And I smiled, because I finally felt the same. Meanwhile, my classes continued. Foundations of counseling turned into trauma and family systems. I stopped sitting in the back. Started speaking more, got a paper returned with a handwritten note. "You don't just write. You translate pain." My professor pulled me aside after class one day. "Have you ever thought about writing a memoir?" I laughed. "I've thought about it. I've just never believed anyone would care." "Start with a single sentence," she said. "Write for yourself. Let everyone else listen later." So I opened a blank document that night and typed. My father left me out of his will, but I'm the one who kept him alive, and I knew I was ready. I moved again. Not far, just closer to the city. A second-story walk-up with cracked tile and terrible parking, but a balcony where the sun landed every morning like a quiet promise. I painted the walls myself, hung shelves with crooked books, pinned up postcards of places I hadn't seen yet, but now might. I wasn't chasing anything anymore. I was building. And every piece had my name on it. Ethan came to visit once, just for coffee. We didn't talk about the will, or the funeral, or the hospital nights I spent alone. We talked about what was ahead. "I might propose to Amanda," he said. "I want to be better at things. Marriage, family, then start by not disappearing." He nodded. Didn't promise. But I think he heard me. Before he left, he looked around my tiny apartment and said, "It feels like you here." "It is," I said, for the first time in, maybe ever. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old drawer, I found a picture of Dad and me. I was 11. He was helping me fix a chain on my bike. We were both smiling. No tension, no illness, no weight. I almost didn't recognize us. I framed it not out of longing, But as a reminder, there was love.it just wasn't always given the way I needed. And that's okay. Not all wounds close with apologies. Some close when you stop needing one. That night, I lit a candle, sat at my desk, and wrote 3 things in my journal. I was never the mistake. I am not what was left behind. I get to choose what I carry forward. And suddenly, the weight of the will, the house, the silence, it all shrank. Not erased, but no longer in charge. Because I had finally stopped asking, why didn't he see me? And started answering, I see myself now, and that's enough. The email came on a Monday morning. Subject line, Keynote Opportunity Daughters Who Care. It was from the founder of a nonprofit I followed quietly for years, a community for women who had given their youth, careers, and freedom to care for aging or ailing family, often with no recognition and no rest. The email was short. We've read your essay. Your voice is clear, grounded, and deeply needed. Would you consider being our closing speaker at this year's summit? I read it twice, then closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling for a long time, not because I was unsure, but because something in me whispered, this is it. Say what you never could. To the people who finally want to listen, the summit was scheduled in April, a hotel ballroom in Chicago, glass chandeliers, a stage framed with white lilies, 200 seats, the kind of stage I'd once believed was only for people who hadn't been forgotten. I wrote my speech slowly, not in fury, but in truth, and when the day came, I stood in the green room with a warm scarf around my shoulders and the speech folded twice in my coat pocket just in case I forgot. I didn't. When they called my name, the applause rose gently, respectful, real. I stepped onto the stage, the mic was cool in my palm, the lights warm on my skin, and when I looked out into the crowd, I saw her, Joan, my aunt, and beside her, to my surprise, Ethan. They didn't wave. They didn't make a scene. They just sat, ready to hear me. I took a breath and spoke. My name is Rachel Moore, and for 12 years, I was my father's daughter, his nurse, his calendar, his entire sense of time. I missed graduations, relationships, my own life so he wouldn't miss his meds, and when he died, his will didn't mention my name, but let me be clear. I was not invisible. I was indispensable. The room was still. I used to think I wasn't chosen, that if I'd just done more, he might have remembered me in ink, not just breath. But here's what I know now. Love is not proven through suffering. Loyalty is not a contest. And sometimes, being the one who stayed behind doesn't mean you lost, it means you were the only one brave enough to show up. A few people gasped. One woman sobbed. I steadied myself. I no longer wait for thank yous. I no longer explain why I stayed. I carry my truth in full sentences now, no edits. No guilt. I paused, then added, I was never written out. I simply started writing myself in. Applause broke slowly, then built, wave after wave. I closed my speech with a nod, no tears, just certainty. Afterward, people lined up to hug me, thank me, ask for copies. Francis from my Tuesday group brought flowers. Priya, my friend from college, had driven 6 hours to surprise me. Even the founder of the summit pulled me aside. I've heard dozens of stories, but yours made me feel like I was sitting in that house with you. I smiled. Because you were. Later, in the lobby, Ethan approached no fanfare. Just his familiar, awkward posture, the older brother I didn't hate, but had spent years emotionally eclipsed by. You were incredible, he said. I didn't know you had all that in you. I always did. I replied. It's just that no one ever asked. He nodded. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wrap box. This is from Aunt Joan. Something Mom kept. She thought you should have it now. I opened it when I got home. Inside was a photograph me, age 9, sitting beside Mom at a picnic, her arm around me, both of us mid-laugh. On the back, in Mom's handwriting, My strong girl, the one who stays, the one who sees. I stared at it for a long time. Not because it healed me, but because it reminded me. I had always been seen, just not always by the people I wanted. Now, I saw myself, and that was more than enough. Some endings aren't explosions, they're soft closures. Like a window finally shut after years of letting in cold air. Like a door you choose not to knock on again. That's what life became. Post-summit. Not louder, but more mine. I published a full memoir 5 months later. Title: The One Who Stayed, A Daughter's Story of Care, Silence, and Self-Return. A small press picked it up. It didn't hit bestseller lists, but it hit hearts. Emails came from daughters in Ohio, from sons in Delhi, from quiet caretakers across oceans who whispered, "I thought I was the only one. Your story saved me from breaking. I'm printing your words and taping them to my fridge." I didn't feel famous. I felt heard, and that was better. I took the book on a small tour: libraries, bookstores, community centers. No glitz, just rooms full of worn chairs and open hearts. A T1Q in Minneapolis. A teenage girl raised her hand and asked, "Do you forgive him now?" Everyone went still. I thought for a long moment. Then said, "I don't know if I do, but I do understand him. And sometimes, that's more powerful." She nodded, wrote something in her notebook, and I realized even the answers we're unsure of can give someone else peace. Back home, I framed Mom's photo, the one with her handwriting on the back. I placed it above my writing desk, right beside a sticky note that reads, "I see myself now." I wake up every morning to both. I no longer call myself a former caregiver. That title implies I stopped being something, but caregiving shapes you in permanent ways. It teaches you patience, compassion, and eventually the hardest of all, letting go. Now, I call myself a writer, a teacher, a woman who stayed, and then left, and then returned to herself, and that is a legacy I get to keep. Ethan and I aren't close, but we're real now. He sends updates about Amanda. I send him essays when I'm brave. We don't talk about the house. We don't have to. Some things don't need revisiting to be respected. Joan mailed me a necklace for my birthday. It wasn't fancy, a small silver pendant with a tiny engraved word. Enough. I wear it when I speak, when I write, when I need to remember that healing isn't becoming perfect, it's becoming free. Last week, a student in my counseling class asked, "How do you help people when you're still healing too?" I smiled, by being honest. By saying, "Me too," and by reminding them you don't need to be fully healed to deserve peace. You just need to believe you're worth saving. She wrote it down like scripture. And I realized so would I. The world didn't change when I stopped sacrificing. I did. I no longer apologize for choosing peace, for sleeping in, for saying no, for walking away from tables where my name was forgotten, because now I build the tables and invite the ones who stayed for themselves too. I visited the old house once, not to reclaim anything, just to see it from the sidewalk. A new family lives there now, kids' bikes on the lawn, fresh paint on the porch, laughter from a window that used to echo coughs and machines, and for the first time, I smiled, not because it's theirs, but because it's no longer mine to mourn. I got in my car, drove home, lit a candle, opened a fresh journal, and wrote, "He left me out of the will, but I left with more than he ever knew how to give." Then I turned the page, blank, open, waiting. And this time, I knew exactly what to write.